Okay, guys, so normally I try to do like an epic retelling of the lore for dramatic emphasis, right? You know, to try and tell the story in a unique way that draws in the listener. But I am not doing that here. I can't. Zarina Kassir's story is simply not worth that dedication or work. It is a terrible, terrible story. Allow me to fill you in briefly, okay? Zarina was born to Lebanese parents in Brooklyn, New York. Please keep that information in mind as we go forward, okay? Now, Zarina, at first, was ashamed of her cultural heritage, so while in school, she tried to hide it from her peers. Fair enough. Until she became a teenager, when she decided she was actually proud of her heritage for some reason. Well, actually, no, they give the reason. It just doesn't make sense. The reason is that she watched news stories of injustice being exposed. How is that a reason? Like, how is that a reason to suddenly be proud of your heritage? I don't understand that, but whatever, it doesn't matter. In any case, Zarina was inspired by the news always exposing these awful things, so she wanted to blow the lid off of some injustice cases of her own. So she borrows her dad's digital camera and starts her own podcast online, where she would go around her hometown and interview random people about issues and hot button topics and reveal them. And this gets her something of a following. Okay, decent enough. However, there's an incident that changes everything. Ready? Okay, here we go. Brace yourself. This is actually incredible. Zarina heard a rumor about a fast food restaurant that was exploiting its employees. She wanted to make a documentary on the situation, so she went undercover, faked an accent, and got a job as a waitress. After 3 weeks of unpaid work, no, I'm going to repeat that. After 3 weeks of unpaid work, she demanded her paycheck and was fired for it. In what universe? In what universe does that happen? Behavior? Okay, look, behavior. I know you guys love your woke bullshit, but you are aware that's illegal, right? And it also doesn't make any sense. First of all, she could easily take this to court, as could every other employee. Because keep in mind, this is New York City. Come on. In fact, how could this restaurant stay open if that's what they do? How could this restaurant stay open? Wouldn't the owner have trouble keeping it open if he didn't pay anyone? Because anyone who works at a place where they don't get paid wouldn't stay. They would not stay to work if they couldn't get pay. Are you kidding? Are you kidding? Seriously, behavior. You did not think this one through. What restaurant? No, I'm being dead serious. Now, let's leave out the law aspect. Let's leave out the fact that there are laws against this kind of thing. If you actually had a restaurant owner who refused to pay his employees, you could not keep that restaurant open. And then, if you choose not to pay your employees and they leave and they talk about it, are you aware of how fast your restaurant will go under because no one wants to support you? Are you for real behavior? But no, guys, seriously, it gets worse. No, you thought that was bad? It gets worse. She released her clips and footage of the abusive behavior and horrible lack of pay, and the local news picked up her story, but spun the facts in favor of the restaurant. I'm going to repeat that because it bears repeating. She released her clips and footage of the abusive behavior and horrible lack of pay, and the local news picked up her story, but spun the facts in favor of the restaurant. Again, behavior. In what universe? Remember, this is Brooklyn, New York. New York. You mean to tell me that a New York news station did not come out in defense of the woman of color who had video evidence of her being abused and mistreated by a restaurant store owner? Seriously, you actually expect me to believe that? You really, no, dude, you cannot expect me to believe that. But you know what? Let's leave out the realism of this. You know what? Let's pretend that I could actually buy that. Let's pretend that that exists in the real world. This doesn't make sense in context of the lore either. Remember what got Zarina interested in doing this kind of thing in the first place? Remember what inspired her? No, think about it, guys. What was it that inspired her? What made her want to start this podcast thing in the first place? She was inspired by the news when they busted open stories of injustice. Remember? Because she loved the fact that the news could take these stories of injustice and expose them for everyone to see, so she wanted to do it too. So which is it, behavior? Is the news a bastion of truth and exposing evil and injustice that inspires a little girl to be something bigger than she is? Or are they a servant of the big mean abusers out there who cover up the truth? Which narrative are you trying to sell, you amateurs? At least keep some consistency, because on the one hand, the news is out there inspiring little girls to go out there and bust open crimes, but on the other hand, it's covering up crimes for the sake of what? Oh my lord. This is actually awful. Not only does it not make any realistic sense, because no way would this actually happen in the real world. I can believe more readily that a girl like Zarina could make up a story like this and the news would run with it like it was true, before I believe that they would actually try to cover this up. No, that doesn't make any sense. But we can even make this look worse by realizing that this doesn't fit within the context of their own continuity. This is awful. And I could end it right there. I could end this right there just to show you how awful this lore is, but let's keep going. No, it doesn't get any better. So after that, she goes on to pursue being an independent filmmaker, where she makes her first piece exposing the controversial murder charges against 2 Italian migrants. This one, for some reason, got her an award and publicity recognizing her for her awesomeness, but only a month later, her father was killed by a man on the street. Deemed manslaughter, the killer was given a light sentence, but Zarina was convinced that there was more to it than that, and so she became obsessed with getting to the truth. Okay, fair. She flew out to an old penitentiary in Nebraska where he was being held and dug deep into the truth until she exposed his ties to gang activity. That he had no remorse for the death of her father. She dug deeper and harder and created a full-length documentary on the whole thing and the awfulness of gang crime and a blood-soaked aftermath coming from it. And even though it finally got noticed by the news, it was only because it had reached international acclaim by that point. Okay? Several problems with this portion. The first, and probably biggest problem I have is this. Why did her father die? No, really. No, that's actually my legit question. The lore actually does not answer that question. Why did this gangster kill her father? Surely there was a reason for it, because they said that it was premeditated. Because remember, the whole idea here is that the criminal, the murderer, got off on a light charge because they deemed it manslaughter, but she knew there was more to it, and she proved it was premeditated, but the lore forgot to give the reason why he was killed. So why'd he do it? The lore doesn't answer it, and I find that hilariously silly. It's like the lore writer just forgot to add that tidbit. Secondly, the lore specifically says, quote, she used her research to push his buttons and finally get a confessional of a premeditated crime. Okay, so you pushed his buttons to get him to confess to a murder. You? What interrogation skills do you have, Zarina? Why did this hardened gangster cave to you? How come this guy couldn't just ignore you or end your sessions? He reserves the right to not accept visitors, you know, right? But this one amateur filmmaker just knows all the tricks to making hardened criminals break. And third, and finally, this isn't as big a deal, but it does make me laugh. What the hell do you mean the only reason the news talked about your film is that it was internationally recognized? Correct me if I'm wrong, but normally doesn't it have to make the news just to get around in the first place? Shouldn't it be advertised, exposed, shared around? And again, this goes back to my previous point. Is the news on the side of exposing the truth or not? In fact, what problem would they have with talking about this documentary? Why not jump on this? Why not talk about it? They have literally no reason. Keep in mind, her parents are from Lebanon. She has Lebanese parents. And some random gangster shoves her father into the street to get run over, and a documentary comes out revealing that it was premeditated and intentional? What news story wouldn't jump on that? Oh my gosh. And it finally reveals that other inmates in the prison wanted an opportunity to be interviewed so they could be on the news themselves, right? But only one person actually interested her, an inmate who told her a story that the closed-off portion of this jail was jailed off because of an inmate back in 1860 who was jailed wrongfully, and there was a real story there for her, blah, blah, blah. So she sneaks into the block-off area, and the entity took her. It's that simple. The lore is garbage. Okay, that's the reason I didn't want to do this in kind of an epic way. The lore is absolute garbage, and do I even need to explain why? Totally inconsistent, lacking in any credibility or realism, and here's the sad part. Let me tell you the real sad part that I have here. I am so sick. No, really. I am so sick of the female journalist seeking the truth bullcrap. It is such a wasted archetype. I'm sick of it. I'm just sick of it. Now, to be fair, we don't see a whole lot of that right now, but isn't this no different than Nancy Wheeler from earlier? I talked about Nancy Wheeler during the Stranger Things chapter, and I feel like this is just Nancy Wheeler, only Lebanese. You know, it's kind of the same thing, seeking the truth no matter what. God, the problem I have here is twofold. Number one, this doesn't feel real. Even if a character comes from a fictional world, there has to be some degree of realism, and this doesn't feel real. Everything that happens to Zarina, I feel like, how could this be the way it went down? She basically wants to, she's inspired by the news, right? She's inspired by the news, who bust open moments of criminals and injustice being covered up. She wants to do the same thing, so she goes out and she wants to start her own podcast and expose evils and crimes being covered up, and she finally gets one. She goes into a restaurant and exposes it, only for the news to cover it up. I thought the news would have jumped on it. I thought the news would have jumped on that. In fact, here's another question. Why didn't she pursue a job in journalism? Why didn't she go to the news? If she was so inspired by the news, why didn't she become a journalist and work for the news? I don't even understand. It doesn't make any sense realistically, the fact that everyone's trying to cover it up, even though in the real world this would be stuff that makes headline news. Think about it. Restaurant exposed for not paying its employees and being abusive to minorities. Can you not see that being big label news? And then even if we ignore the realism aspect, the continuity doesn't make sense. If she was inspired by the news, why is the news being evil and manipulative and concealing? I don't understand that. Why? And then the lore writers seem to forget some of the stuff that matters. We get this reveal that her father was killed, thrown into traffic by a man on the street, and he said that it was accidental, but she knows, she knows there's more to it than that. This guy has ties to the gang, to the mob, so she goes after him to find out. She prods him and pokes him and works him until finally reveals it was all premeditated. It was planned. He planned to kill him, but then they never give the big number one reason. Why? Why did he do it? What was the reason? If it was premeditated, he probably had a reason. Why did he do it? What did her father have connection to gangs for? Did he owe money? Was he in tight with someone? Was he in bad with his bookie? What the deal is going on here? Why was he killed? You see what I mean? The more you really dig into it, the more you realize, yeah, Zarina's lore is shit. But you know what? She makes up for it with some decent perks. So let's stop ranting about the lore and talk about her perks. Zarina Kassir comes in with 3 perks: Off the Record, Red Herring, and For the People. Off the Record is a perk that activates after you escape a hook or you get rescued from one. Off the Record stays active for 80 seconds. It hides your aura from the killer if they attempt to read it, hides your grunts of pain, and it grants you the endurance status effect so you can't be downed if hit. However, Off the Record deactivates immediately if you perform a conspicuous action. This perk is strong and good for evading tunneling killers. It also allows you the chance to hide away somewhere quick without fearing the killer will find you, so I actually really like this perk. Red Herring is a great perk for distracting the killer. If you work on a generator for 3 seconds, this perk activates. The generator you were working on is highlighted yellow, and the next time you hide in a locker, the generator emits a loud noise notification for the killer. The perk then cools down for 40 seconds. This perk will reset or deactivate the moment you hide in a locker or work on a different generator. This perk is very useful if you need to draw the killer away from you and your team. However, I wouldn't use it in the middle of a chase. Try to use it when the killer has hooked someone or when a chase is broken off. That means the killer is more likely to investigate because they're not distracted by anything. And, I hate to say it, you might also find success using this against your fellow survivors. I recall one match where we had 1 gen left to do and everyone was working on one. I used this perk to lure the killer to one on the other side of the map so me and another survivor could speed through ours. Though it meant sending the killer after a teammate, sometimes the cold tactics work through. We got out after all. And then finally, For the People, one of the strongest perks for helping your teammates. This perk can only be used if you are at full health. You have the ability to trade health states with a survivor. If you are healing a down or injured survivor without a medkit, that's important, you can't use a medkit, you can press the ability button, instantly injure yourself to bring that survivor immediately into the injured state if they're down, or into the healthy state if they're injured. You will be injured and suffer the broken status effect for 60 seconds, but this perk is very useful to get an injured or down survivor back in the game quickly without wasting too much time. But be warned, using this perk not only puts you in the broken effect, but you become the killer's obsession once used. Zarina Kassir is an ultimate example of a character whose mechanics work great but whose lore is terrible. I like Zarina's overall look, her design is fine, I don't have an issue with it, and her perks are actually really great, I love her perks, but her lore is just so terrible. There's nothing about it that I like. It's not that it's just lazily written or annoying to me like Ace Visconti, it's not that it's having to be retconned over and over again like David King's, but the problem I have with it is it's just so obviously pandering, but it's so poorly done in that pandering sense. It's not even as good as Jane Romero's, who, while pandering, at the very least came from a place of somewhat realism. At least it started off in a somewhat realistic way and had a lot of promise. This one was dead on step one. You have a girl who couldn't even figure, like, she starts off not being proud of her heritage and then randomly decides she's proud of it again just because she's inspired by the news, but then it turns out the news isn't what she thought it was, and I don't know. I don't even know, guys. This one's awful. The lore here is awful. The perks are good, though, but I hope you guys find time to play her and get her perks and then never use her again, because there are lots of better survivors to use. But that takes care of the survivor, and now we've got a killer to talk about, a killer who... whew, he's a doozy, but that's for next time. Thank you guys so much, and I will see you next time in the fog. Take care.